And now we move to the blazing Pokrovsk front line of the Russian world, where the brutality continues. On the Pokrovsk direction, since the beginning of the day, the occupiers have made 31 attempts to push back our defenders from positions in the areas of the settlements of Pantelejmonovka, Alexandropol, Yelizavetovka, Lisovka, Kotlina, Udachnoe, Uspenovka, Novoandreyevka, Andreyevka, and towards Pokrovsk, Kotlyarovka, Doen, Alexeyevka. The defense forces are holding back the enemy's onslaught and have already repelled 27 attacks. 4 clashes are still ongoing, but you know Russia has indeed become less active in the Pokrovsk direction. However, they are trying to restore the intensity of their actions. This was stated by the spokesperson of the Kortitsia troop grouping, Viktor Tregubov. But still, how did our heroes manage to halt the Russian troops near Pokrovsk? What is happening in the Kursk region? And how are the armed forces of Ukraine managing to advance and secure positions in the Belgorod region? Our report on the latest news from the front follows.
The armed forces repelled the offensive on Pokrovsk and launched an attack in the Belgorod region. Meanwhile, Russia's attempts to storm the south of Ukraine have not been successful. What is the situation on the front today, and what lies is the Kremlin telling while reporting on its successes? The information that the armed forces of Ukraine launched an offensive in the Belgorod region caused quite a stir recently. At that time, the discussion was about the battles for the village of Demidovka. But by the end of the week, the area under the control of Ukrainian forces expanded by 2 more settlements. According to Z military correspondents, the Ukrainian troop grouping decided to stretch along the border, creating a kind of buffer zone. At the same time, analysts name another task of the Belgorod operation as attempts to draw part of the Russian troops there, which are currently attacking in the Kursk region. Officially, the Russian military leadership acknowledged that the Ukrainians have once again breached their border. However, in their characteristic manner, they stated that there are no more than 50 saboteurs. At the same time, they are allegedly suffering heavy losses. Simultaneously, they are losing tanks, BMPs, and other equipment.
According to the Russian Ministry of Defense, several were lost, as reported by this military command. Of the military command, several long-range howitzers of American manufacture. This causes the greatest objection and amazement. Because you play, because you play. To take long-range artillery with you in an attack on enemy territory, well, that requires some thinking. I think that no one has done this. So these reports, they are naturally typical for the Russian military leadership. These are fake reports where the enemy's losses are simply fabricated, having no relation to the real situation.
Another Russian fake which is actively spreading online is that the Russian Federation is preparing to occupy the largest cities in the north and south of Ukraine. Recently, President Zelensky did indeed say that these regions should be ready to repel attacks. But occupation? Here, Kremlin propaganda has clearly overdone it. We can prepare for any scenario.
We must be ready for the development of any kind of events, but to say that these actions will lead to the occupation of Kharkiv, Sumy, or Zaporizhzhia would be a significant exaggeration. Well, then they will simply be engaged. The enemy does not have the strength to capture Kharkiv, Sumy, Zaporizhzhia.
But then why is the Russian Federation preparing a possible offensive in new directions? According to analysts, we have seen something similar since the first day of the war, where the main strike is in one place and the other assaults serve to distract attention and tie up the reserves of the armed forces of Ukraine. Strategically.
The strategic direction for the enemy remains the Donetsk area. But again, based on the patterns of Russian military science, an offensive in this section of the front involves secondary offensive actions or a diversionary offensive, which today could include actions in the Sumy, Kharkiv, and Zaporizhzhia regions.
And on the main attack direction, considering the enemy's efforts and losses, it can be said that there are no results. Paying daily with hundreds of lives mobilized for mere tens of meters of advancement, the Kremlin still has not been able to achieve its main goal of capturing Pokrovsk since last year. 2 weeks ago, they were stopped by the IPTO, 110th.
I think it was the 1st Brigade that stopped them, disrupted their logistics during the assault, and drove them from their positions. Then the 25th Airborne completely dismantled them there. Those who could fled, and they liberated the settlement. Then there were 5 or 6 episodes already in the Pokrovsk direction when the enemy even driven from their positions as our forces advanced forward. This is still a small counteroffensive, it's just the situation on the battlefield, but it already shows that they are exhausted there and their strength. They are lacking.
In light of this, analysts believe that a breakthrough by the Russians in other sections of the front should not be expected. Everyone now understands that the occupation of the Donetsk region is task number 1 for Putin. Therefore, the Kremlin will definitely not deploy prepared units to the south or north of Ukraine.
To what extent does the enemy have the resources that would allow them to conduct active operations on several sections of the front simultaneously? There is only one conclusion. The enemy does not have such resources. As of today, I'll say more. At the peak of their activity, we observed the number of the enemy, and this was mentioned by General Budanov and the President of Ukraine. The number of the enemy was up to 650,000. Today we are talking about approximately 610,000 operating on the fronts. So approximately 3 divisions have disappeared somewhere.
In all fairness, it should be said that the Russians do have some successes. By gathering everything possible and supplementing their troops with North Koreans, they were still able to push the Ukrainian armed forces from their positions in the Kursk region. However, our military is fulfilling their tasks there. To this day, holding a bridgehead of about 100 square kilometers and repeatedly thwarting all Russian attempts to encircle them.
The Ukrainian defense forces have likely found an effective way to combat guided aerial bombs, not JDAMs, which the aggressor country's army, the Russian Federation, is dropping by the hundreds on Ukrainian positions and frontline settlements. This is stated in the material published by The Telegraph on March 10th. So, is it really true? Have the Ukrainians found a countermeasure to these deadly bombs? Our colleagues from the SpecCorp project have investigated this issue. Let's watch.
Huge craters, destroyed houses, and shattered streets are the consequences of enemy attacks on the frontline city of Kostiantynivka. The Russians send up to a dozen guided aerial bombs of varying power there daily, practically leveling the city to the ground.
They use aerial bombs of different power, 250 kilograms, half a ton, even 3 tons. So this is a serious problem. And in 2023 they effectively used them at the beginning of their advance in offensive actions and then added artillery and brought in infantry.
It was precisely thanks to the tactic of first bombing, then assault, that in February of last year the Russian army was able to capture Avdiivka and advance towards Pokrovsk. In September 2024, the occupiers dropped more than 900 bombs along the entire front in just 1 week. This number became a record. However, at the moment, Russia's most powerful conventional weapon, which until recently our military could hardly counter, has begun to seriously lose its effectiveness.
Previously, to dismantle our positions and hit the target, it took about 1-2 bombs, but now it takes about 15-16 on average. That is, quantitatively speaking, the pressure from the bombs has not decreased. Well, I mean, they drop a lot of them, hoping that some will hit.
The Russians use several typical designs of bombs for launching. The most common is when an explosive aerial bomb of various weights is equipped with the so-called UMPK, a Universal Planning and Correction Module. Simply put, they add foldable wings and a GPS module. This allows attacking targets from a distance of up to 60 kilometers. Jamming the guidance block of the bomb was considered almost impossible for nearly 2 years.
It is quite possible to act directly on the UMPK kit using electronic warfare means, suppressing the navigation satellite, understanding that this does not mean a 100% guarantee of the result. The result is that the arrival happens anyway. That is, there are still arrivals, but considering that our front line is very dense, roughly speaking, they fall either in front of the positions or behind the positions.
Another way to counter enemy caps, which are actively used in the armed forces, is to shoot down enemy reconnaissance drones. These are mainly drones like Orlan and Zala.
Sukharevsky, the commander of the unmanned systems forces, stated that Ukraine is developing its own laser weapons. Plus, we have even older developments of our own. These are anti-aircraft missiles of the Coral 2 type, about which nothing has been said for a very long time. Heard. The best way, of course, would be to combat Russian aviation, but there are problems here. Firstly, we must keep our air defense systems at a distance, because otherwise the enemy will start hunting them. Our F-16s, they are mainly needed for air defense.
Unknown experimental weapon against the Russian KAB was used by Ukraine during the air attack on Zaporizhzhia on February 6th. At that time, the bomb was successfully shot down. The Air Force assured that this was not the first case of a successful KAB interception, but not a word about the method of engagement.
During this time, it was possible to carry out strikes, as we remember, on enterprises that produce, as well as on warehouses and airfields. Here, more long-range weapons are needed, which were not provided to us, as is known. Our allies, primarily the Americans, either limited or stopped.
However, all known methods of countering bombs are more of a constant search for an effective method than an already existing efficient algorithm. In particular, the information from Forbes that Ukraine is jamming bombs along the entire front line, destroying them. One of Russia's most significant advantages is considered too optimistic. Experts are convinced.
I can only quote Sergei Flash, a specialist who immediately reacted to this and wrote, "And do the Russian bombs know about this?" The primary source of this information is Fighter Bomber, a Russian blogger who wrote not that they are ineffective, but that the consumption of ammunition has increased, in his opinion.
However, it is possible to counter the bombs, and the methods are known. The question is only about the cost and availability of resources, which Ukraine lacks, especially compared to the number of bombs the Russians have.
This UMPK, these wings and motors, they can even be installed in makeshift conditions. That is, they take an ordinary aerial bomb and within 2 or 3 days, all these devices are attached to it.
At the same time, an affordable and effective algorithm for intercepting KABs is currently being sought and tested without exaggeration. All of Ukraine's allies. And this work, engineers cautiously suggest, is capable of ending him with the desired result.
Well, now let's analyze the situation in detail on the Huliaipol and Orikhiv fronts. Let's be honest, this is another sacred goal for Putin and his entourage. Accordingly, the situation here is extremely tense. On the Huliaipol front, the enemy attacked our troops twice, trying to advance towards the open field. The aggressor also carried out airstrikes on the areas of the settlements of Novodarivka, Malinivka, and Huliaipol. On the Orikhiv front, the enemy unsuccessfully attempted to advance towards Lobkov. The aggressor conducted an airstrike on the settlement of Kamyanske. Destroy the enemy remotely. The 65th Brigade Bolshoi Lug has acquired another ground drone. In contrast to logistical and evacuation vehicles, this is the killer drone Nom-2. It is equipped with a machine gun and 2 grenade launchers, and it is precisely this that will destroy the occupiers. The soldiers have already tested the machine at the training ground. These tests were first seen by TSN journalist Kira Oves. Her report follows.
The final adjustment. The soldiers firmly attach the machine gun and grenade launcher, and Nom-2 is ready for its first live fire tests. The control system of this robot is no different from aerial FPVs. Cameras are installed on the drone so the soldier can see where it's going and its target. Everything is displayed on the controller's screen. Commands are also issued from here.
This is actually the second time in my life I've held this controller and the drone more or less obeyed. Admittedly, with some specific delays, but you need to learn everything. And I think that anyone can learn to skillfully operate this equipment in a few weeks. You can insert 2 RPG machine guns. Each RPG will have 1 shot. After that, they need to be reloaded. As for the machine gun, you load the belt and go. You can fire in bursts or single shots.
Yuri is originally from Volnyansk in Zaporizhzhia. He voluntarily joined the armed forces 5 months ago. In civilian life, he is an auto electrician. These skills have been useful in the military. After all, he was the one who improved the drone.
He made the system more compact, so that it could fit anywhere. It could be moved from point A to point B. But that wasn't the only thing they did. They also worked on the release system to make it work better.
Drones of various modifications are currently indispensable on the front line. They ease the heavy daily work of the military.
This robot, in fact, in terms of workload, replaces in particular 3 people if used to its maximum capabilities. A very practical thing. We can avoid risking the lives of military personnel. Of course, it's easier to put out a piece of metal to take the hit. Whether it takes the hit, it changes a lot. And,
Drones today are a priority. Drones are life. And drones are our great helpers.
Due to the activity of enemy eyes in the sky, dangerous fiber optic FPV drones, it is becoming increasingly difficult for our warriors to protect themselves. Therefore, we need drones and as many as possible so that the military can operate and destroy the enemy from cover.
In fact, today there is a huge demand in the Ukrainian army for robotic systems that will somewhat replace people. Because as you probably know, in Zaporizhzhia the situation is probably the most difficult, especially when it comes to reaching positions and returning from them. Children will come, go to positions, turn back to no.
The Russian invaders do not cease their attempts to advance even by a centimeter in the Zaporizhzhia direction, say the defenders. To stop the enemy, our warriors need help, not only with equipment, but also with people who will operate it.
That's all for today, but very soon on the Front News program. New, unique materials from our journalists and the hottest spots of the war, obtained so that you know the truth. This was Vladimir Timoshenko with you. Take care of yourself and your loved ones.